Welcome to New York State Homes and Community Renewals Section 3 Training and Technical Assistance Workshop webinar. What is Section 3? Section 3 of the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968, implementing regulations, ensures that employment and other economic opportunities generated by certain HUD financial assistance shall, to the greatest extent feasible, be directed to low and very low income persons. Section 3 is the law, and it's not an option. Applicability to units of general and local government. Any unit of general and local government, UGLG, awarded any amount triggering Section 3, as discussed later in the presentation, must comply with all Section 3 requirements. This obligation is automatically passed down to UGLG's contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients whenever the UGLG awards an amount that triggers Section 3 as well. What is a Section 3 covered project? A Section 3 covered project involves the construction or rehabilitation of housing, including reduction of lead-based paint hazards or other public construction such as street repair, sewage line repair, or installation updates to building facades, etc. Section 3 residents. Federal and state Section 3 policies require that any new employment opportunities be extended to qualified low and very low income residents of the affected area. Essentially, Section 3 residents are given priority in new hiring situations which result from HUD's efforts to rebuild their neighborhoods. Who is a Section 3 resident? Public Housing Authority residents automatically qualify as Section 3 residents. Low and very low income persons who live in the metropolitan area or non-metropolitan county where a HUD-assisted project for housing or community development is located. Section 3 status is race and gender neutral. The preferences provided under this regulation are based on income level and location. Here's an example of certification form to become a Section 3 resident that you can fill out and submit to HCR. What is low income? Low income includes anyone who is at or below 80% of the median income in the surrounding area. A low income person includes families as well as single persons. The HUD Secretary may establish income ceilings higher or lower than 80% of the median due to unusually high or low income family incomes. What is very low income? A very low income person includes someone who is at or below 50% the median income in the surrounding area. Very low income persons include families as well as single persons. The HUD Secretary may establish income ceilings higher or lower than 50% of the median due to unusually high or low income family incomes. What is a Section 3 business concern? Must be owned by a Section 3 resident, 51% ownership, or have at least 30% of full-time employees who are currently Section 3 residents. This criterion can also be met if, within 3 years of the date of first employment with the business concern, the individuals were Section 3 residents, or provide evidence of a commitment to subcontract more than 25% of the total dollar amount of all subcontracts to Section 3 business concerns that meet these qualifications. Here's an example of the business certification form in order to become a Section 3 business concern that you can fill out and submit to HCR. HUD Section 3 Registry is a place that business concerns can go ahead and self-certify themselves in order to be identified by contractors and subcontractors to work with them under HUD financially assisted projects. Nonprofits. A nonprofit organization can be a legitimate business concern if they also meet the criteria of a Section 3 business concern. Greatest extent feasible efforts. Greatest extent feasible efforts. Demonstrate sufficient greatest extent feasible efforts to meet the HUD Section 3 contract goals. UGLGs and their contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients must carefully document the steps taken to secure Section 3 participation. Efforts to employ Section 3 residents to the greatest extent feasible should be made at all job levels. In determining whether a particular bidder has met greatest extent feasible efforts, a UGLG procurement officer may take into account the performance of other bidders in meeting the goal. For example, when the lowest bidder fails to meet the contract goal but other bidders meet it, the procurement officer may reasonably raise the question on whether, with additional reasonable efforts, the parent successful bidder could have met the goal. Section 3 triggers, thresholds, and contract goals. What triggers Section 3? The requirements of Section 3 apply to HUD recipients who are required to hire new employees due to an award of a $200,000 contract amount or more. In addition, all recipients receiving funds in amount greater than $100,000 to complete housing projects are also required to comply with Section 3 requirements. All public housing authority funds are subject to Section 3. Section 3 threshold example. The City of Valley Place receives $210,000 in HUD funding. The funds will be used as follows: A, housing rehabilitation, $180,000; B, micro enterprise evolving loan fund, $20,000; and C, fair housing counseling, $10,000. The cities are subject to Section 3 requirements because they receive over $200,000 in housing and community development funds. However, only the funds expended for Section 3 covered activities must comply with the requirements of Section 3. Hence, the expenditure of the $180,000 is covered by Section 3. The remaining $30,000 that was used for fair housing counseling and the revolving loan fund is not covered by Section 3. Section 3 contract goals. At least 30% of all new employees hired have to be Section 3 residents, and at least 10% of the total dollar amount of all Section 3 covered contracts for housing rehabilitation, construction, and other public construction should be granted to qualified Section 3 businesses, and at least 3% of the total dollar amount of non-construction professional services contracts should be granted to qualified Section 3 businesses. Is Section 3 cumulative? Contracts for Section 3 covered projects are not cumulative. The requirements of Section 3 apply to each individual contract that meets the threshold. For example, if a UGLG awards three housing rehabilitation contracts at $36,000, $50,000, and $20,000 for a cumulative total of $106,000 to one contractor for 3 different projects within a 12-month period, the contractor is not required to comply with the requirements of Section 3 because none of the contracts meet the $100,000 threshold. However, the UGLG would still be held responsible for meeting the requirements of Section 3. HUD Section 3 Safe Harbor. In the absence of evidence to the contrary, if a UGLG and its contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients, etc., meet the minimum numerical goal set forth above, HUD will presume full compliance with Section 3. However, if the goal is not met by any party, they must specifically demonstrate why they failed to comply. Who constitutes as a new hire? A new employee hire means a full-time employee for a new permanent, temporary, or seasonal position that is created as a direct result of the expenditure of Section 3 covered financial assistance. Laid off workers. Any employee that was on the payroll of a recipient, developer, or contractor on the day that Section 3 covered assistance was provided can be counted towards the Section 3 minimum numerical goal for employment. Hiring priority levels. Highest priority, low and very low income residents certified as Section 3 qualified residing in the neighborhood where the project is located. Second priority, participants of a public and social service program funded by HUD. Third priority, other low and very low income residents throughout the state of New York who are certified as Section 3 qualified. Note, as the rule currently stands, Section 3 residents and business concerns can be drawn on a national level, although HUD prefers local outsourcing in the impacted areas. UGLG's responsibility for adherence to Section 3. A UGLG has an active responsibility to ensure their own Section 3 compliance as well as the compliance of their contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients. The responsibility falls on the UGLG to demonstrate that they and subsequently their contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients made efforts to comply to the greatest extent feasible. These responsibilities include, but are not limited to, taking an active role in ensuring Section 3 compliance. This includes designing and implementing procedures to ensure that all parties, including residents, businesses, contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients, comply with Section 3. Connecting Section 3 residents to training and employment opportunities, including those limited English proficient populations as discussed below. Facilitating the award of contracts to Section 3 business concerns. Ensuring full compliance with Section 3 rules and regulations by assessing the hiring and subcontracting needs of contractors, regularly monitoring contractor compliance, and refraining from entering the contracts with any contractor that previously failed to comply with the requirements of Section 3, and submitting a quarterly monitoring compliance report to HCR detailing the UGLG's activity to conform to the requirements of Section 3. Contractor, subcontractor, and subrecipient responsibilities. All contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients' responsibilities include, but are not limited to, implementing procedures designed to notify Section 3 residents about training and employment opportunities generated by Section 3 covered assistance, including limited English proficient populations across New York State and/or the immediate impact area. Implementing procedures designed to notify Section 3 business concern about opportunities generated by Section 3 covered assistance, facilitating the training and employment of Section 3 residents, and documenting all actions taken to comply with meeting the Section 3 employment and contracting goals, the results, and any impediments faced. The Section 3 plan. Each UGLG must have a Section 3 plan. This plan is an essential component of your Section 3 program success and compliance with HUD and HCR. Similar to the UGLGs, all contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients must have a Section 3 plan. UGLGs must review and, where necessary, assist its contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients with revising their plans in a manner that will ensure compliance. Any refusal to fulfill contractual obligations with an approved Section 3 plan can be construed as a breach of contract. The Section 3 plan must include specific information regarding the following: identification of the project area, specific information about the recipient's current workforce, specific plan for hiring Section 3 qualified residents, specific plan for engaging Section 3 designated businesses, and, if applicable, each HUD Section 3 certified business that will participate in the contract, a description of work each named Section 3 certified business will perform with the dollar amount of participation. What does a Section 3 plan need to have? A signed acknowledgement of recipient of information regarding Section 3 requirements and obligation form, a firm commitment to include the HUD Section 3 clause in all subcontracts, a firm commitment to conduct aggressive outreach and notification to potential Section 3 residents and businesses of hiring opportunities using site signage, flyers, etc. Failure to comply with a submitted Section 3 plan. Failure to fulfill contractual obligations pursuant to the Section 3 plan can be construed as a breach of contract and can result in contract termination, a penalty, or other sanctions as allowable under the regulations and determined in the contract terms. UGLG Section 3 Coordinator. Each UGLG must appoint a Section 3 Coordinator. The Section 3 Coordinator is responsible for developing the entity's Section 3 plan as well as ensuring that UGLG's activities are in compliance with applicable laws, rules, and regulations. The Section 3 Coordinator will also review contractor, subcontractor, and subrecipient Section 3 plans. All approved Section 3 plans must become an essential component of the contracting process. Provide technical assistance during the process of developing a Section 3 plan. Supply contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients with a current list of Section 3 certified businesses and certified Section 3 qualified residents seeking employment opportunities. Oversee the implementation of all Section 3 plans approved by UGLG, and manage education, outreach efforts, and other activities that ensure that UGLG meets its Section 3 obligations. Contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients, Section 3 coordinator. Contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients should designate someone within the organization as their Section 3 coordinator. This is the person that the UGLG Section 3 coordinator will be in contact with about reports and other necessary information. He or she will also be responsible for making sure that the organization activities adhere to the Section 3 plan as set forth in their contract. Best practices for Section 3 outreach. UGLGs must work with a myriad of organizations to form partnerships ensuring workforce development opportunities for Section 3 residents, such as housing authorities, nonprofit and social service agencies, labor and union organizations, employment agencies, resident organizations, and other ethnic organizations. New York Housing Authority, New York Department of Labor, New York State Office of Family and Children Services, vocational schools, community colleges, Urban League, NAACP, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and Council of La Raza. Section 3 Community Collaboration. What's at risk? HUD Housing and Community Development Resources, Housing Authority Capital and Operating Funds. Why are they at risk? If communities and housing authorities remain non-compliant, HUD resources are at risk of being lost. So what's the solution? HCR, UGLGs, contractors, developers, etc. must come together and collaborate as one community to develop cross-cutting strategies to meet Section 3 goals. Looking for a Section 3 business? You can find them on the HUD Section 3 Business Registry. Monitoring and compliance. HCR must report Section 3 compliance to HUD each year. Annually, HCR is required to submit HUD 60002 to HUD's Economic Opportunity Division in Washington, D.C. Here's an example of the Section 3 summary report to HUD that the Section 3 coordinator can fill out to submit to HCR. Regular compliance monitoring. The UGLG Section 3 coordinator will conduct regular monitoring compliance reviews for itself and its contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients. When noncompliance is found, the UGLG will notify the noncompliant party of the deficiency and provide recommendations for corrective actions. UGLG Section 3 quarterly reporting to HCR. Each UGLG will generate a report capturing its efforts to comply with the provisions of Section 3 on a quarterly basis. These reports must be submitted to HCR in a timely manner in the format and within the time frame provided. Here's an example of the utilization form that the Section 3 coordinator can fill out in order to submit to HCR. Similarly, contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients must report to UGLGs as prescribed by the entity's Section 3 plan and contractual obligations. Each UGLG, for record-keeping sake, will generate, receive, and maintain records to document compliance with the Section 3 program objectives. At a minimum, records shall be maintained for 5 years and include specific information and documentation demonstrating that the numerical goals were met, as well as proof that all parties carried out their responsibilities pursuant to law. Enforcement and potential sanctions. In order to enforce the provisions of Section 3, UGLGs must require contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients to submit a detailed Section 3 plan with firm hiring and contracting goals, which becomes part of their contract, submit their certified payrolls electronically at the time of contract award and throughout the job. This makes it easier to identify new hires and track duration of employment. Consider past compliance with Section 3. Past failure to comply with Section 3 should be grounds to disqualify a bidder. Establish fines or penalties for contractors that fail to comply with Section 3 as part of the contract. And require that recipients of the UGLG's funding have no prior Section 3 issues or compliance findings. Failure to comply with the UGLG Section 3 goals include, but are not limited to, withholding of grant or reimbursement payments, exclusion from participating in future funding process and application, including all RFPs or NOFAs, disbarment from doing business with UGLG for all federal funding programs, and further sanctions, including monetary compensation for those impacted by non-compliance. HUD's proposed changes to Section 3. On March 27, 2015, HUD released proposed changes to the Section 3 program. A very good summary was provided by HUD during its webinar with its grant partners. Generally, the proposed changes seek to tighten perceived loopholes and give HUD greater authority to enforce the provisions of the law. Those changes relevant to a UGLG's operation of the Section 3 program are included on the next few slides. New Section 3 threshold. Section 3 requirements would apply to recipients of housing and community development, financial assistance that plan to obligate or commit an aggregate amount of $400K or more in Section 3 covered housing rehabilitation, housing construction, demolition, or other public construction annually. Proposed change to new hire definition. Section 3 currently lacks a provision concerning how long a Section 3 resident should be employed. This allows for employers to hire Section 3 residents for a short term and continually replace them in order to increase their performance under the contract. HUD proposes to redefine a new hire as someone who works a minimum of 50% of the average hours worked in their trade for the duration of the project. For example, if a typical painter works 40 hours per week, then a Section 3 new hire must work a minimum of 20 hours per week for as long as the typical painter works at the project. Revised definition of Section 3 business concerns. The current rule defines a Section 3 business as one that meets one of the three criteria. Section 3 resident owned at least 51% of the business, at least 30% of the employees are permanent full-time Section 3 residents, or the business commits to subcontracting at least 25% of the dollar amount of all its contracts to businesses that meet either of the two criteria. The proposed rule will eliminate the third option due to the fact that HUD found a pattern of misuse by contractors that initially indicated they would award 25% of subcontractors to Section 3 businesses in order to receive preference for contracts, but never provided contracts to them. Priority for employee retention. The proposed rule gives priority consideration to Section 3 businesses that will retain a minimum of 75% of previously hired Section 3 residents and provide a minimum of 50% of on-the-job training or apprenticeship opportunities to Section 3 residents. Flat 10% contract goals. The current rule has a goal of awarding at least 10% of the total dollar amount of construction contracts and at least 3% of professional non-construction contracts to Section 3 businesses. HUD now sees no statutory basis for distinguishing between construction and non-construction contracts. Therefore, the proposed rule would establish the 10% goal regardless of the type of contract. Section 3 Local Area. Currently, a Section 3 resident or business anywhere in the nation can receive preference whether or not they live in or operate in the metropolitan area where the HUD-assisted work is carried out. The proposed rule will require the Section 3 resident or business to live in or be located in the Section 3 local area, defined as the metropolitan statistical area or the non-metropolitan county where the Section 3 project takes place. Self-certification. The proposed rule would also allow grantees such as the UGLGs to presume that residents or businesses qualify if they live in or are located in disadvantaged census tracts. In addition, the UGLG must examine a sample of those who self-certify or who are presumed qualified to verify compliance. Monitor payroll for employment data. The proposed rule would require grantees administering Section 3 projects subject to Davis-Bacon prevailing wage obligations to monitor a contractor's subcontractor's payroll for changes in employment, such as terminations, retirements, transfers, and new job vacancies, in order to identify instances when Section 3 obligations are triggered. Labor unions. Projects within jurisdictions that have bargaining agreements with labor unions typically have low rates of Section 3 compliance because unions operate outside of Section 3 obligations. The proposed rule would require grantees to amend all existing agreements with labor unions to ensure that Section 3 obligations are included to prevent labor unions from obstructing recipients' ability to achieve compliance. Stronger penalties. Finally, the proposed rule would seek penalties such as denying or withholding subsequent funds in the event of a breach of contract or failure to adhere to Section 3 plan to place. This would apply only to UGLG and its contractors, subcontractors, and subrecipients. Limited English proficiency. HUD mandates that all low-income individuals and families, regardless of the ability to understand and speak English, have access to the benefits of the UGLG Section 3 plan. Therefore, a UGLG should develop methodologies to reaching those low-income residents with limited English proficiency to ensure that they have fair access to the Section 3 program. UGLG's LEAP outreach. UGLGs should implement various methods to ensure that low-income, non-English speaking residents have access to the Section 3 programming, but not limited to specific LEAP outreach through public and stakeholder meetings, provision of public service announcements on TV and radio to disperse program information, training staff on LEAP, provide for multilingual translation via telephone, accept referrals to liaison groups who provide services to LEAP populations, and post notification on the UGLG's website about the availability of language access services free of charge. This brings us to the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, please contact HCR Section 3 Coordinator Gwen Pope using the email and phone number provided below. Thank you for your attendance.